Well, up next on CBC, faith is not something that we often tackle here at CBC Manitoba, despite it being an important part of many Manitobans' lives. So we want to change that. For 22 years, John Longhurst has been the faith reporter and columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press. In fact, he's the only remaining faith reporter at a major Canadian media outlet. Recently, we asked John if he wanted to expand his column here on the radio and reporting more specifically here on the radio. And he said yes. So today's the first installment. John Longhurst joins me live in studio. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm really looking forward to this, to your reports on CBC. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, John, and, your role at the Winnipeg Free Press.
Well, yes, it's certainly true that I am the only faith reporter at a major media Canadian outlet. And that's been the case since 2023. And that's when Mary Hines retired at CBC Tapestry, and she wasn't replaced. But my role doing this particular project, which we call Religion in the News, as faith reporting at the Free Press, goes back to 2018. And that's when the Free Press announced it wanted to do a better job of serving communities in Winnipeg. And since I'd been the faith page columnist since 2003, I knew that the faith community here didn't feel particularly well served by the Free Press, that if religion appeared in the newspaper at all, it was probably going to be something bad. So I went to editor Paul Simin and then publisher Bob Cox, and I said I applauded their desire to serve the communities better in Winnipeg. But one community that didn't feel very well served was the faith community. And I told them if they wanted to do a better job of that, that would be something very much appreciated by them. And they said they would love to do a better job of serving the faith community and doing a better job of reporting about faith, but they didn't have any money. And I said, well, what if I go out and raise it? And that's what I did. So today, about 30 faith groups right across the religious spectrum here in Winnipeg financially support my work at the Free Press as a freelancer, reporting about faith. And about 100, 200 individuals donate as well every year through our annual crowdfunders. And since we started in 2019, we've published over 850 news stories about faith in the Free Press. And that's on top of the over 250 columns I've written on the faith page.
Wow, so it's sustained for that long. I had no idea that there was a public element to this in terms of groups funding your work. It speaks obviously to the desire. Why, in your view, how do you articulate why faith reporting in mainstream media is important?
Well, for one reason, because there are a lot of faith stories out there, just showing from what we've been able to do at the Free Press. But secondly, it's because lots of people in Canada today are still religious or spiritual, or they believe in a higher power, or they pray or meditate or whatever. Here in Winnipeg, over 60% of people say that they're affiliated with a religious group of some kind. They may not all go to religious services. In fact, probably most of them don't. But when asked, they still say they have an affinity for some religious tradition.
Still identifying that somehow.
Still, yes. It's also important because it's a way of balancing the news. If religion appears in the news, it tends to be about scandal, clergy sexual abuse, or somebody in some foreign country blowing themselves up in the name of their God or something like that. But a lot of good and positive things happen because of religion, too. For example, in this community, probably up to half the food banks that serve people in this community are located in places of worship. And you can't tell the story of tackling homelessness or addictions without talking about religious groups or religious people, like Shalom Mission or things like that, which are actively addressing those issues.
850 stories is a lot. And then you also mentioned 250 columns. So I don't know how you're going to answer this, but of your stories, is there one that stands out in particular that you feel you want to sort of impart that stayed with you?
You know, that's so very, very hard to do. And you probably know that because of the many stories you've done too. But I would say that the stories that stand out for me from the work I've done, one of them certainly is the privilege, the amazing privilege I've had to interview Holocaust survivors, many of whom are deceased by now, but probably about 10 of them locally since I began doing this. And just hearing their stories of incredible survival against all those terrible odds, it's just moved me when I talked to them and when I was able to share that. But other stories that have stuck with me, telling the stories of Indigenous people who went through residential schools and somehow managed to come out with their spirits unbroken and intact and just say, wow, how did you do that? And just to hear those stories, to be able to share them with others was just an incredible privilege. And then I was able to go to Rome in 2022 with the Indigenous delegations and report about their visit to the Pope, asking him to come to Canada to apologize. And these were mainly Indigenous Catholics who were going there. And then to go to Alberta that same summer and hear that apology and travel there on a bus with Indigenous Catholics and to hear them and to hear their stories and to see what it meant to them to hear that apology. That was very, very moving.
I have to ask you about one of your more recent columns because it deals with how Canadian faith groups are reacting right now to Donald Trump's attacks on Canada, on our country, both in terms of tariffs, but also, of course, saying that he wants to annex us. So tell me what you found through your faith lens.
Well, I found almost nothing, and that was the story. When I went looking at the national websites of major faith groups in this country, I was dismayed to find zero. Nobody was saying anything about the one thing that everybody in Canada was talking about: politicians, celebrities, sports figures, you name it. It was on the minds of every Canadian. But when I went to the major faith group websites, I could find zero. It's like they didn't even acknowledge it was happening. Many faith groups sometimes complain that the media or government or society views religion as irrelevant, and they think that's a bad thing. But here was an issue everyone was talking about, and they weren't relevant. They weren't saying anything. And I thought, man, that's just not a good look for religion in this country right now.
Where does the mixing of church and state fall into this conversation, do you think?
It's an important question. And in writing about this and in talking about this morning, I'm not asking these faith groups to weigh in on politics or to say which party is right and which party is wrong. Certainly nothing like that. But I think they should acknowledge that it's happening and that their members and other Canadians are feeling anxious and afraid and uncertain about their futures. It could be as simple as posting a prayer, just asking people to pray for politicians for wisdom at this time as they negotiate and deal with Trump in the United States, or just reminding us to look out after each other at this time when we're all feeling a little uncertain about our futures. Those things would be good.
What do you hope that faith groups might do when you look at this sort of from a national perspective?
Well, the best thing, I think, I certainly hope each group does do something, and I'm happy to say that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, which has its headquarters right here in Winnipeg, did issue a statement just this week, and so that's a good sign. But at a minimum, I think they should see about getting together. If we couldn't have some sort of multi-faith response, not just Christians, not just Muslims, not just Jews, but a multi-faith response which brings people together, because this is a time for Canadians to unite. And faith groups can unite nationally and provincially over this as well, and just signal that this is important and we care and we notice.
Thank you so much for, the first report and, our little introduction, of course, at the beginning there to the listeners and to those that are viewing on YouTube. And we're really looking forward to your reporting here on CBC.
Thanks, Marcy. Appreciate it.